All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, how are we doing over here? How are we doing over here? Let's see. Let's see. Let me see reactions in here. There we go. There we go. All right, people coming in. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get Laura's session going, queued up here. We're gonna get that playing, and we'll go and get this to you live. See you in just a moment.
Thank you, Thomas. I am so honored to kick off Email Camp Message Mania this year. Since you've put together this incredible lineup of speakers, and you're going to get so much good content over the next 2 days. And I'll be honest, Cinch and Email Camp is one of my favorite conferences to speak at. I've spoken here before, and it's always a highlight of my speaking year. This year, when I threw my name into the hat and said, hey, I'll come talk again, I did what I often do, which is I don't actually recycle a lot of talks. I tend to create them new every time I do a new talk. But I offer a range of topics. I can talk on this, or I can talk on this, or I can talk on this. I can talk about a lot of different things in the deliverability space. And so it's like you can just throw me in where you have a hole you think in your agenda and you want somebody to talk about something. And then at the end, I kind of threw in this throwaway line of, and I've been thinking a whole lot about how things are changing in the future of deliverability, so I could make a talk about that if you wanted. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure what I thought the future of deliverability was going to be or what this talk was going to look like. So, of course, that's the topic they picked for me, the future of deliverability. And I kind of feel like that really needs a lot more reverb, but I simply just don't have the voice talent, so just take it as read. Before we get too far into this, let me introduce myself. I know Thomas did a great introduction. I'm Laura Atkins. I'm co-founder of Word to the Wise and Women of Email. In the late 90s, I was actually training as a scientist and working in labs up and down the East Coast and a couple universities in the Midwest. And I picked up fighting spam as a hobby, really. And it was all about, and I've told this story before, in fact, I may have told it at Email Camp, it was all about learning how email worked and using spam fighting as a way to figure that out. So I did that through the late 90s, just on the side as I was being a scientist. And in 2000, I moved out to the West Coast with Steve into the Bay Area and got hired by MAPS to build their outsourced abuse test team. The idea was we were going to build this group of experts that we could go into ISPs and ESPs and handle compliance and deliverability and do all of these kinds of things. That didn't last very long. There were a lot of layoffs in the Bay Area around 2001, and I was one of them. So at that time, I kind of started independently consulting and mostly working with folks who were listed on the MAPS RBL, but a whole bunch of other things were going on at the time. And in September, Steve and I started Word to the Wise. And in the last 25 years, man, I've seen a lot of changes and I've seen a lot of things develop and I've seen a lot of things grow. And I'm going to cut to the chase here. I don't actually know what the future of deliverability is going to look like. I don't know all the details. What I do know, and what I want you to take away from this talk, is this idea that every single one of us, all of us here, all the folks who couldn't make it this week, all of us have the opportunity to create that future of deliverability. And I say this from a lot of experience. And today I'm really going to tell you the story of the deliverability industry and how a bunch of people working together to make email better created the present and how we did that. And then I'm going to talk about the opportunities that I see opening up in the very recent past and kind of where I think the industry is right now. And then I'm going to challenge you to go out and build that future, create the future that you want to see in deliverability. So deliverability in email marketing is like most internet related fields. It's fairly new. It's undergone rapid change. And, certainly when I was growing up, email wasn't a thing and there were no careers in email marketing. And deliverability was just not even a thing. So I want all of you to think about when you started in email, when you started as an email marketer, when you started in deliverability, when did you get your first email related job? And if you entered, somewhere around the time that I did, the late 90s, the early 2000s, you'll probably have a lot of memories of things like the domination of AOL. It was all AOL. There was also Yahoo and Hotmail and some of the broadband providers, but we were really still using dial-up at that point. We didn't have tools. We didn't have measurement. We didn't actually have deliverability problems because we didn't have filters for a long time. And when we did start getting deliverability problems, it was kind of like you had to know the right people to talk to, and you had to kind of get your way into this small group of colleagues to find out who to talk to and get things changed. Folks who joined later, the late 2000s, early 2010s, will have seen the rise of Gmail and the absolute domination of Gmail. I mean, AOL basically just went away and Gmail took over. You'll have seen the proliferation of postmaster pages, the growth of feedback loops, IP certification, and designated postmaster support teams and pathways to addressing issues. You'll have seen a lot of this stuff and seen a lot of the stuff that we built very early on and use those tools to create your own path in deliverability. And those of you who joined later, in the last decade, the last 5, 6, 8 years, you'll have been immersed in things like engagement and reputation-based rate limits, domain reputation, relatively established pathways to resolve deliverability issues. There's multiple communities of really smart people who are willing to answer lots of questions and who can help you with almost any deliverability problem. You won't have seen quite as many postmaster pages, but you'll have seen the rise of Google Postmaster tools, and you'll have seen a whole lot of stuff. Collectively, we've been through a lot of changes and a lot of eras almost in 25 years. And as someone who's watched this industry from the very beginning, I can say right now that I think we're in this moment of transition and the future isn't really clear. And it's scary and it's extremely frustrating. And for some of us who've been around long enough, it's just like, oh God, do we have to do this again? We don't have all the answers. And sometimes we just need to say, we don't know. And I'm finding myself saying that more and more in the last couple of years. But we're just going to have to try things and work out how to get deliverability to work. So in the beginning, deliverability was really pretty calm. We had no tools for dealing with spam because spam wasn't a thing. By the time I was in grad school in the mid-90s, I'd had about 3 or 4 email addresses at that point in time and got my first email spam somewhere in 94 or 95. And it was only really a few messages a week. It wasn't really quite, a problem, but it was really annoying. My email box until that point was all conversations with friends or colleagues. And it was real mail. It was real correspondence. There wasn't email marketing at that point, really. And to get this spam was just annoying. And the mail clients were really basic. I used Pine at the time, which is a text-based client. There wasn't a spam folder. There wasn't built-in filtering. If you wanted to filter anything with Pine, you had to actually go out and learn an entirely different language called ProcMail and write ProcMail filters to get mail into different mailboxes, which I did do because I wanted to have my personal mail and my personal lists go into one mailbox, and I wanted to have my work mail and my work lists go into another mailbox and all of that kind of thing. And the other thing that I think some folks may not remember or may not even know existed was around that time, we had really limited storage. My first paid internet account, because I had accounts through my jobs and school and all of that kind of thing. My first paid internet account had 10 megabytes of storage. And that included anything I wanted to have. If I wanted to publish a web page, it had to include all of my web content, any pictures I had up, anything up there, and all of my email. And one of the challenges with spam really early on was that we had such tiny mailbox limits. And as spam got worse and worse, spammers would actually fill up your mailbox and you'd lose real mail and it would bounce out because you were over your quota. By the early 2000s, spam was definitely on the increase and expanding to dozens a day in the average inbox. And it really started to become a problem. And there were a lot of people who were just ready to take on spam. As I said earlier, AOL was dominating the online and the email space at the time, and they did a lot. A lot of the things that we do today trace back to the decisions that AOL made in the early 2000s. They sued spammers, they created legal precedents, they actually created the spam folder, they created feedback loops, they did a whole lot of stuff. They had the first dedicated postmaster team, they did a lot. And I remember around 2000, the late 90s, I don't exactly remember when, I saw my first anti-spam ad, and it was an AOL ad. And there was a huckster wandering around outside a building, going, click here, as people were trying to enter the building and go about their day. And he'd quote various phrases out of spam, and I don't remember all of the details, but the folks would go through and they'd enter the building, and then these glass doors would slam shut, and the huckster would just slam right into the building. And as the ad went on, there were two AOL employees who were walking by and who were talking about, we blocked 75% of spam last year and we lowered our spam complaint rates. And when I saw that ad for the first time, what I actually realized was, wow, AOL thinks spam filtering is so important, they're going to create an entire ad to tout how good their spam filtering is. And that's when I realized deliverability might actually be a real career path. At the time, we didn't have good filters. What we were doing was really pretty basic. There was IP-based blocking, and that was almost about it. We didn't have a lot of domain-based blocking because there was no authentication. We didn't have SPF, or we were just starting to play around with it. There was no DKIM. DMARC wouldn't be around for a decade. And a lot of companies were really struggling with the volume of spam, and they were testing all sorts of ways to filter it and block it. The spam folder was a very new innovation. There was no "this is spam" button. I remember being on a panel at a marketing conference in Aspen in 2004. And after the panel, we were, of course, fielding questions. And one of the folks in the back of the room stood up and said, "Hey, what about this new Yahoo "this is spam" button?" And it was like, tell me more. And Yahoo had introduced the "this is spam" button. And as part of that introduction, to teach people what it was and what it did, they ran a contest to teach people that, to report spam using the "this is spam" button. And the more spam that you reported, you could get enrolled in a raffle or something. I don't remember all of the details, but the marketers were kind of upset that Yahoo was actually encouraging people to report mail as spam, whether or not it was spam. And we can still have the arguments, and we still do have the arguments about whether or not the "this is spam" button is used correctly, but it was new, and people were trying to teach end users what they could do about it. So the volume of spam and the lack of automation meant a lot of ISPs were struggling to filter mail effectively, and a lot of good mail was being blocked accidentally. We just didn't have the sophisticated filters that we have today. We didn't have tools. We didn't have feedback loops. We didn't have SNDS. We didn't have Google Postmaster. We didn't even have Gmail at this time. And we didn't have clear ways to fix delivery problems. So we'd make some changes and we'd try some things, and then we'd make different changes and try those things. And deliverability fundamentally was making it all up as we went along. And even the word deliverability was something most folks had never heard. I spent a lot of time in the early years actually convincing people that deliverability was a thing and that I could solve their problems, and that what we were doing would work. And you just kind of have to trust me. And I realized that I don't have any data, but this is all really new, but I know what I'm doing. We really kind of had to teach people as we were going on what spam was, what deliverability was, what filters were, what IP addresses were, all of those kinds of things. And as I think about what I talk with my clients about, one of the things that I mention with a lot of clients and have done for many years now is this idea of inflection points or crystallization points. And it's a time when you move from like one era or one space to another. And you don't really think you're making that many changes, but you are. And so you're crossing this inflection point. You're going through this crystallization point where the complexity or scale of something changes and the rules sort of change. It's not like you can get away with stuff, but the way that deliverability works for small senders that are sending less than 5,000 messages a day is very different than the way deliverability works for companies like some of my clients that are sending 20 million email messages a day. And so these kind of crystallization points, inflection points, really shock people when they go through them, because all of a sudden they don't think they've really changed anything, but the rules appear to have changed and their deliverability is worse, and it can be challenging. As I think about the model in the future, that this is actually true for the deliverability industry as a whole. The first half of the 2000s was really chaotic, and then we kind of went through this inflection crystallization point, and that brought us to where we are today. And if we think about, the mid 2000s and kind of as we went through, a bunch of things happened over the next few years. A lot of companies, ISPs and third parties, worked on how to make filtering better. And filtering did get better. Filtering is so much better now than it was back then. It's so much more specific. It's so much more careful. It's much better. Other companies like Goodmail and Habeas and ReturnPath focused on ways to identify and certify good senders so that ISPs could buy that data from them and then go ahead and apply filters different to those known good senders. Standards folks got together and they tested and developed a whole different range of ways to authenticate email. Some were effective. SPF and DKIM are the ones that kind of stuck with us. But there were many other attempts and many other protocols that were tried, and they just didn't quite do what everybody thought they should do. A bunch of ISPs published postmaster pages and made their deliverability requirements easily viewable so that you could go to postmaster.rr.com and you could see that you had to have this and that and this, and you could only open this many connections. And they were making the rules really clear. Deliverability and compliance became a job across the industry. ISPs hired postmaster teams, ISPs and ESPs hired compliance and abuse desk teams, companies hired folks to help with deliverability. ReturnPath, I think, hired half the industry at one point or another and brought in a lot of people to do a lot of different things. And all of us, whatever part of the industry we were working in, we were kind of working together to help customers get their mail delivered. And we were creating deliverability as we went along. And we all worked together and we worked in parallel and we worked in different ways to create and develop systems and processes that worked to make email better. And for the end user, things really did get better. Mailbox providers started innovating on how they were displaying mail. They tried a whole bunch of different things. Thus, we were through that crystallization point. We had gone through the inflection point and we kind of knew what we were doing. Before, we had a field where mail was just a mess. And afterwards, it still wasn't better, but at least we had ways to fix things. We'd written the playbook. We knew what we were doing. And as deliverability folks, whether we worked for ESPs or whether we worked for independently or we worked for deliverability services companies, we could help marketers understand what was going on and get their mail to the inbox using the techniques and processes that leverage the power of filters. We weren't trying to get around the filters. We were trying to work with the filters to get wanted mail in front of the end user. And so as the dust settled, we entered into what I kind of think of as the golden age of deliverability. Many mailbox providers, particularly in the US, but across the world, publish postmaster pages, and we could go there and we could open tickets and we could talk to people and we could get answers. We had reliable tools that could tell us whether or not mail was going to the inbox. We had resources to do our jobs. Companies were actually funding deliverability, and some places had, giant compliance teams and giant deliverability teams to really help their customers get mail through. We could solve the problem either because we knew the answer or because, at that time, it was still a fairly small community and most of us knew each other. We could ask around and we worked a lot together to kind of collaborate and bring all this information to the forefront and help each other understand what was going on and what was breaking. But of course, it didn't last. And in the past 2 or 3 years, I've been watching the industry drastically change. I've been seeing the chaos ramp up again. I've been seeing that the playbooks we developed a decade and a half ago really aren't appropriate and really don't work in the modern email ecosystem. And as I've been thinking a lot about that, I'm looking at the tools are not the same. Inbox monitoring doesn't tell you what it used to tell you. It's just not as good as it used to be. A bunch of ISPs stopped publishing their postmaster pages and have pulled them down. I hear with colleagues that, companies are starving deliverability of resources. People, really smart people who are really good at their job are finding themselves out of work. Commercial tools are becoming more expensive, and some of the previously free tools and resources are now costing companies tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And all of this deliverability is once again getting harder. It's getting more complicated, and our playbooks need to change. And then the real change came. About a year ago, Yahoo and Google announced that they'd gotten together and were publishing new standards for email senders. And mail that didn't meet those standards would experience delivery problems at both mailbox providers. Now, to be clear, most of these new requirements were things that deliverability folks have been telling people to do for years. They were and still are best practices. But what would happen is when I would tell folks you should do this, I'd get pushback from my clients because I couldn't tell them honestly that if they didn't do this, their mail wouldn't get delivered, because you didn't have to do best practices in order to get your mail delivered. And so a lot of places would just not do the best practices. They just do the practices that they had to do. So what Yahoo and Google really did was just add that enforcement stick so that we could actually get best practices implemented with a lot of these customers and senders who just didn't really want to bother if they could still get their mail in an inbox. The other thing about the new requirements is that it actually pushed a lot of responsibility back on the sender rather than the ESP. When things like SPF and DKIM first came out, and even DMARC to an extent, a lot of the ESPs just took that work on themselves and just handled that for their customers. And so they would sign with their own DKIM key, they would do a whole bunch of things, and there wasn't a lot of pressure really to make their customers do the right thing, have their authentication align, all of that kind of thing. And so what I really think that the big change with the Yahoo and Google announcement was that the standards pushed the responsibility for deliverability off of the ESP and back onto the individual sender. And it's a very different approach. And, you know, the ESPs kind of had a bit of a meltdown, reasonably so, because they had to, when the announcement first came out, they had 4 months over the busiest mailing period of the year to educate millions of customers and to make sure that they complied with these standards. Now, again, the industry worked together, and the standards, the implementation of the standards was pushed back a little bit to give the ESPs time to do all of this work. And I gotta say, if you work at an ESP, if you do deliverability for an ESP, you guys did an amazing job. You stood up to this massive challenge and did it. You did. You know, in the beginning of 2024, there was this explosion of webinars, customer information schemes, blog posts, white papers, infographic, you know, reaching out to different customers, telling them what they needed to do, all to try and bring these millions of individual senders, some of them really small, up to speed with the new requirements and get them compliant. Now, Google and Yahoo are probably the most visible and public evidence of these changes in email, but there's actually other stuff going on. Microsoft has been doing some stuff, and Microsoft has always been kind of in its own little category, in its own little strange world. But we're seeing new boilerplates at Microsoft. We're hearing from different ESPs that they're clicking all the links in emails and they're following all the links and they're doing a bunch of stuff. And it looks to me from the outside like they're testing something, but I don't know what they're testing. ISPs are starting to get really picky about adherence to SMTP standards. And so there's occasionally these weird deliverability problems that are like, oh, your header line is too long, or you're not folding things correctly, or your encoding is off. And in the past, ISPs would generally be, yeah, that's not really SMTP, but it's fine. But that's begun to be exploited by spammers and exploited by bad actors. And so they've had to really tighten things down. What does this all mean for the future? It means actually, I think things are going to get a little harder before they get better. And if you feel like deliverability has become more challenging over the last few years, I don't think it's just you. I really think that things are fundamentally harder than they used to be because of these changes. And if I think about it, it takes me back to the early days. All of this chaos, we could see what was going on, and we had a feeling we knew what was going on, but we weren't really sure how to deal with it. And we didn't have a playbook to follow. These days we have a playbook, but the numbers and the data that we use to pick which path to follow in the deliverability playbook just aren't there anymore. We can't trust opens anymore. We kind of almost can't trust clicks anymore. And, you know, bounces are weird, and it's just, there's just, the data that we have to pick the path that we're going to walk to fix this deliverability problem is not as clear as it used to be. Email is fundamentally changing. Which brings us to the fact that I think we're in the middle of another crystallization or inflection point. The chaos, the questions. There's new technologies like AI. There's new legislation coming up in different US states and different countries, and the EU's getting on the bandwagon. It's all new, but it all feels a little familiar. And it is, and I'm not going to downplay this, it is so challenging. It's a hard place to be. And fundamentally, the last few years have been a challenge globally. And for many of us, our resilience is a little lower than we'd like. And that makes change and adapting to change harder. But there is good news. First, the chaos will not last forever. Things will settle down, I promise. We will find a new normal. We'll edit the playbook that we've got, and we'll write new chapters, and we'll find new metrics, and we'll create new paths. Of that, I have no doubt. We've done it before, we can do it again. Secondly, we all have a massive opportunity to create a future. We can create a better future. Each and every one of you has within you a skill, a talent, some knowledge, a viewpoint that is unique. You can make a difference, and you can take that skill, that knowledge, that talent, and create that playbook. Over the next few days, you're going to hear so much information from so many experts in the field, and I want you to listen to what they're sharing with you. But while you do, I want you to listen to a few things and remember a few things. Filters are ever changing. They have to be. They have to be flexible to meet ongoing and emerging threats. And that means, as deliverability folks, we need to be flexible as well. We need to understand that, yes, everything did change, and it's nothing we did, it's that the filters have changed. When you hear about the experiences and how people address problems and the things that they're teaching you in the next 2 days, remember they're sharing their experience. And what you need to do is take that experience and apply it to your own situations. Take their advice, take their knowledge, but trust your gut. If something feels off or not quite right for the specific situation you're in, then experiment, try new things. Think about what they did, what problems they were, how your problem is different, and maybe a new way to approach it. I also want you to remember that deliverability is actually important, that what we do is crucial to the health and the success of the email ecosystem. And sometimes it can feel like we're an overlooked and forgotten part of the industry where we're doing our jobs, but people don't notice how hard we're actually working, because when we do our jobs, problems don't arise. We head them off before they happen. And then we get laid off, and then we get fired because they don't need deliverability anymore, because now deliverability is a solved problem. And then in 6 months, they realize that's not true, and they have to hire people back. We keep things running. And don't forget that. And don't forget to advocate for yourselves inside of your own jobs and in your careers, but also in the broader ecosystem. Stand up and say, we are important. What we do is important. Don't forget that. And finally, chaos creates opportunity. And oh, wow, do we have a lot of opportunity right now. Find your strength, create your space, take your skills, your knowledge and talents, and use it. This is actually a young enough career here that there are no ruts. There's not a standard career path. We've all kind of made our own way, and you can too. You don't need to follow what one of us or another of us has done. You can create your own path. This is a quote that I've actually been using. I think it's relevant to this talk, right? If you do not choose to lead, if you do not choose to make a change, if you do not choose to create this future, then the future is not going to happen. And we can all make a difference if we decide to do so. And I think at this point, I want to thank you so much for sitting and listening to me talk to you for a while, and we can take some questions. Thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Laura Atkins. Let's go and get Laura up here for a quick question because she has, man, I love talking with Laura. Laura, if you want to go and hop up here. Laura, good to see you. Thank you so much for all that knowledge. The original, one of the wisest people I've ever met in the email space. Laura, quick remarks on your speech real quick.
I think, we're doing it and we're going to make the future. And we don't know what it's going to look like because all of us are going to create it. And that's how we got where we are. And that's where we're going to go forward.
Love it. Love it. Laura, so we got one question for you before we got to let you go for this amazing talk. But someone wanted to know, and this came from an external channel. I'll throw this up here on the screen. And this kind of relates towards the end. And I'm seeing, unfortunately, in this world that, we're starting to see some layoffs in the email deliverability world. But, how can email marketers convince their bosses that investing time and resources into improving deliverability is worth it?
So I think some of this is actually one of the benefits of what Google and Yahoo did, right? Mm-hmm. Because part of what they said was that your authentication has to match, and you have to authenticate as who you are. And that means that and what we've seen happen is that means that the filters get a lot harder and a lot stricter and a lot more challenging for some folks, particularly folks that were kind of gliding by on ESP authentication, and they were getting away with some stuff, and now they have to authenticate as themselves, and all of a sudden they're discovering, oh, look, our reputation's horrible. And so it's that piece of, and this is a lot of what I do in my own consulting, is talking about, deliverability isn't a marketing thing. It's not just your marketing mail. Deliverability is about all your mail. It's about, your sales team who's doing cold outreach, because, 80% of companies have sales team doing cold outreach. It's about, all of the mail that's being sent, and who are you as a company, and how are you representing yourself, and how are you showing what you're doing. So it's really proving that you're working and proving that the things that you're doing, and even if it's those background things that I kind of mentioned, it's the underlying piece of, when we're not actively solving deliverability problems, we're looking at how to make things better. We're looking at what are current trends. And being vocal to your bosses, and I'm kind of the wrong person to really talk about this because I have not been in corporate life for a long time, but being more vocal to your bosses about, these are the things that I did, this is what I've learned, this is how we can apply it here, and just really kind of keeping track for yourself what you've done, and making sure that you can elevator pitch it, making sure that you can expand on it if you need to, but really having that whole piece of, no, if your mail doesn't get in front of your people, if you do not get into the inbox, all of the money we're spending on marketing is just like worthless.
100%. Oh, Laura, thank you so much for joining us real quick. Real fast, where can the people follow along with what's going on and everything that you're advocating for and everything that you're doing in the email world? Where can we follow along with everything you got going?
So I am Laura Atkins over on LinkedIn. I am at Word to the Wise, and at some point I will start blogging again, although Steve's been picking up a lot of the blogging Slack that I've been doing. I'm generally available over on the Email Geek Slack channel, so I know people are saying, they can't get in. I'm sure you'll get in, but you can reach me over there, and I'm at wordtothewise.com.
Awesome. Laura, it is always a pleasure to work with you, to get to hear anything that you have to say, anything that you get to work with. She's been on our podcast, webinars, email camp before. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Laura Atkins. Can I get some crowd reactions in this chat, please, ladies and gentlemen? One of the greatest of all time. Laura, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I hope we get to hang soon. Hope we get to chat even more. But ladies and gentlemen, give me a round of applause for Laura Atkins, people. Love it. Awesome, Laura.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope to see you soon. All right, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go move on to the next session with Jessica Best. Meet you over there in just a second.